When I was 21, I had just moved out of my parents' house. I was living in a small apartment, and I didn't even have my own bathroom. It was almost like a boarding house, except that I had my own kitchen. Most of my friends had moved out of town, so I was lonely a lot of the time. My job was crappy, and I hardly even made enough to go out once a week. I was single, and everyone that I worked with was older, so I didn't have any real opportunities to make friends or meet a girl. That was why I started using online dating. It was 2007, so I signed up for Plenty of Fish. Within the first week, a woman named Haley sent me the first message. Her profile picture caught my attention right away. It was high quality and looked like something out of a professional photo shoot. I thought she was a bot at first, but her messages kept coming, and they were specific enough that I realized she was actually interested in talking. Over a couple of days, our conversations turned regular, and soon we were messaging every day. After a week or so, she suggested a video call. I figured it was the best way to make sure she was real, so we set it up. When we finally did the call, I saw Haley for the first time. She looked like her pictures, just a bit more natural, like any real person would. She was funny and easy to talk to, which kept things going. We didn't live in the same city, so it wasn't that easy to meet up for real. I was okay with that though, because I thought she was worth it. A month went by, and by that point, we were calling almost every night. We hadn't met yet, but we were already talking like we were a couple. It wasn't long before I asked her to be my girlfriend. She said yes, so we agreed to be exclusive. It felt a little strange making that commitment without meeting, but it seemed worth a shot. Not long after, Haley invited me to visit her. She lived over 5 hours away, but I didn't mind. I'd been saving up and had enough to cover the trip and some time off from work, so I decided to make the drive to see her. After a long day on the road, I arrived at the address Haley had given me. Her house was in a neighborhood that didn't look great. It didn't seem like a dangerous area exactly, but it was rough around the edges. I parked on the street, looked around, and sent her a message to let her know I'd arrived. She replied almost immediately and told me I was in the right spot. I looked back at the house, and just then, a man came out the front door and walked down the steps. He looked older than me by about 10 years, so I didn't think much of it. At the time, I thought the house may have had different apartments, and he was her neighbor. That is what I told myself. He didn't notice me and just kept walking. A few minutes later, I went up to the door and knocked. Haley answered quickly and looked pretty much like she had on our video calls. We spent the afternoon together catching up in person, and she seemed friendly, but something felt a bit off. When I came in, I noticed that the door the guy came out of was actually her front door, meaning that he was definitely coming from her place. I eventually asked her about the guy I'd seen earlier. She brushed it off, saying he was just a friend. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I might have made a mistake coming here. I had planned to stay overnight though, so I decided I'd at least stick it out until the morning. Later that evening, we sat on our couch to watch a movie. We'd been getting along well for a while, and I was starting to relax. The guy from before was still on my mind, but I figured it was okay to have friends, and I didn't want to be too controlling, so I was prepared to let it go. We were about halfway through the movie when there was a knock on the door. I looked at Haley, and she turned pale. I didn't know why at the time, but she was nervous. After an uncomfortable amount of time, I asked if she wanted to answer it, but she just sat there. The knocking got louder though, and eventually she got up and walked to the door, opening it a crack. I heard her whispering to someone, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. The conversation started sounding tense, and suddenly the door burst open, knocking Haley back. Then she stumbled to the ground. The man from earlier walked in towering over her, and for a second, he just stared at me. I noticed he was holding a gun down by his side, but he didn't point it at me or at her. Haley was still on the floor, looking up at him. He didn't even seem angry. He just looked at me and said,
"You need to leave, now."
I got up, walked out the door, and kept my eyes forward as I left. I got in my car and started the engine, then I drove away. Once I was around the corner, I called the cops and waited. When they arrived, I watched from a distance as they went up to the door and spoke with Haley. A few minutes later, they left, and Haley never came out to talk to me. The cops came and met with me right after. They told me that both Haley and the other guy said that nothing was wrong and that none of what I said happened. The officer said that there was nothing they could do because Haley didn't want to talk. With that, I was pretty sure it was all over. She messaged me a little later and apologized, but it was all very vague, like she didn't want to admit that anything happened. Maybe she thought I would bring it to the police. I didn't bother replying. I got back in my car and made the drive home that night. We never talked again, and as strange as it was, I don't think her intentions were really bad. Neither her nor the other guy tried to rob or hurt me. I think she was just a confused girl with a possessive ex. I simply got in the middle of it. In the summer before my last year of high school, my dad got a new job in a different city. I wasn't happy about the move because I had all of my friends in my hometown. A single year was hardly enough time to redo all of that, so I knew it would be rough. When I got there, I really was an outsider. My new school was a lot smaller, and everyone else had their friends already. I was the new guy who no one cared about. Most of the guys in my classes either ignored me or seemed put off by the idea of bringing in someone new. It was like I had a wall around me, and I couldn't figure out how to break through it. But then, about a month into the school year, a girl named Angie started talking to me. She was in most of my classes, and didn't seem to care that I was a loner. Angie wasn't really my type, but at that point, I was just glad to have someone to hang out with. She stood out in her own way. She was a larger girl with blue hair and a nose ring. I could tell she was into hardcore music, and her style showed it. She was loud, blunt, and a bit rough around the edges, but she was also the only one who seemed to care that I was there. By the time winter break came around, we were spending a lot of time together. She seemed interested in more than friendship, and soon enough, we were dating. We stayed together until graduation, and while we had some good times, I knew the relationship wouldn't last. She knew all along that I was planning to go away for college, but when the time came, she didn't take it well. Angie threw a fit and accused me of abandoning her. She yelled, cried, and even threw things at me during our last conversation. By the end of it, I knew she was hurt, but I also knew going away was the right choice. My college was over 3 hours away, and I was relieved to have that distance between us. Angie didn't let go as easily, though. I'd get random calls and texts from her, sometimes late at night. She'd rant, insult me, and even threaten to show up. I didn't take it too seriously. I figured it was her way of venting. Eventually, her calls tapered off, and I thought maybe she was moving on. I was living in the dorm rooms, and everything was going well. I had experience being the new guy, but this time, everyone was new. I made a ton of new friends right away, so I was pretty happy. All the rooms on my floor were double rooms, so I had a roommate. He was a good guy, but he had a girlfriend off campus. I had the room to myself most of the time because of that. There were 2 small beds on either end of the room, and a large closet on the far end that we were supposed to share. It was really just mine though, since he didn't use it. One afternoon, the RA from my floor called a meeting for everyone. He told us there had been a break-in in our building last night, which was caught on security cameras. When he described the person, I felt a chill run through me. I knew immediately that it was Angie. I went to the campus security office and told them that I recognized the description and believed it was my ex-girlfriend. By then, Angie's calls stopped completely. It was almost too quiet, and I thought that she was planning something. I kept my door locked and tried not to think too much about it. I was telling myself she probably just wanted to scare me. I focused on classes and my new friends, hoping she had finally moved on for good. One night the next week, I was in my dorm room watching a movie with a friend from my floor. It was late, and we were both just relaxing, barely paying attention to the ending. Then we heard a noise coming from the closet. I paused the movie, and we looked at each other, unsure of what it could be. At first I thought maybe something had fallen off a shelf, but as we listened, we heard more rustling. I got up and went to the closet, and when I opened the door, Angie was there, crouched down in the corner. Before I knew it, she lunged at me, and I barely had time to get out of the way. I stumbled back, then shouted for my friend to run. We bolted out of the room and down the hall, banging on doors as we went to get help. A few people came out, and I quickly told them what had happened. Someone called security, and within minutes, they showed up and went to my room. They found Angie still there, and the cops were called. They arrested her on the spot. I couldn't believe what she'd actually done. She'd come all the way to my college just to creep me like that. Whether she was actually dangerous, I don't know, but it is seriously creepy behavior to do that. She was in that closet for hours, just sitting there waiting. The following story is about a guy named Ben, who I used to date. We'd known each other back in high school, and almost 10 years later, we reconnected through mutual friends at a party. It was strange at first since we hadn't kept in touch over the years, but it felt like an easy choice. We had some shared history, and he already knew things about me that most people wouldn't. I figured it might be nice to date someone who understood where I came from, someone I didn't have to explain myself to. Looking back, I wish I'd thought about it a little more. The truth is that I only knew the version of Ben from high school, and that was a long time ago. People can change a lot, and I found that out the hard way. Things started out well enough. We saw each other on weekends and had dinner a few times a week. But after a couple of months, he began to change. He'd get irritated over small things, start arguments over nothing, and he became extremely possessive. It felt like the worst parts of his personality were coming out all at once, and I began feeling trapped, like I couldn't do anything without him questioning it. Eventually, I broke things off. I figured we'd move on. Maybe it would be awkward when we ran into each other again, but I didn't expect anything extreme. I definitely didn't expect what came next. A couple of days after we split, I started getting anonymous texts. They'd say things like,
No wonder you're single now, or you're a waste of time.
and it all came from different numbers. I'd block one, but another would pop up a day later. It wasn't hard to figure out that it was Ben. I ignored the messages, hoping he'd give up. Instead, the insults kept coming, and he always found a new number. I felt uneasy, but tried to keep calm, thinking he'd lose interest eventually. But with each new message, that hope faded. Then he sent me a photo on Facebook one evening. It was a shot of the front of my apartment building, just a regular photo of the old brick facade. But seeing it felt like he'd broken some invisible boundary. I hadn't given him permission to come by, and we weren't on good terms. I ignored it, thinking he was just trying to get a reaction, but then another photo came in. This time, it was of my car, which was parked on the street. He'd taken it from close range, like he'd walked around it before snapping the picture. I felt uncomfortable, but I didn't respond. I was still hoping that my silence would discourage him, but things only got worse. Every day, there was a new photo. My building, my car from a different angle, the sidewalk I walked on. Finally, one night, he sent a picture of me sitting on my couch through my living room window. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, so he'd clearly used the fire escape to get the shot. The thought of him creeping around my building felt surreal and deeply unsettling. I sent him a message, telling him that if he kept this up, I'd contact the police. He didn't respond, but a couple of days later, another photo came through, followed by a message.
You wouldn't dare.
It felt like he was testing me, like he wanted to see just how far he could go before I'd actually do something about it. Then one day, I got home from work and noticed something wrong with the lock on my door. I put my key in, but it wouldn't go in all the way. When I jiggled it, I felt the lock shift out of place and the door opened without me even turning the handle. Right away, I knew something was wrong. I stepped inside and saw that my apartment had been trashed. My furniture was overturned, drawers were pulled out, and clothes were scattered everywhere. Some of my things were missing, but it was clear this wasn't just a robbery. It was personal. I called the police, and when they arrived, I told them about Ben. After they heard me out, they went to his place to talk to him. Later, they told me that he'd admitted to being there and to sending all the photos and messages. They charged him with harassment and breaking and entering. Knowing he was finally being held accountable was a relief, but the damage he'd done to my sense of security stayed with me for a long time. It took a while to feel comfortable in my own home again, but I moved on, and I haven't seen him since. This story takes place in 2019, back when I was still in high school and still living in Canada. That's before I emigrated to the United States. During that year, I met a girl who I will name Tess for privacy reasons. Me and Tess became friends, and not too long after, we started going out with each other. For the first run of our relationship, it was going really well. We would make out with each other every day and such. This would cycle on for a long while. I actually thought about marrying her at one point in my life, because of how well our relationship was going. One night on a Sunday, we were just coming back from the movie theater, then we walked back home together. We would talk and hold hands for the whole walk home. When we arrived at Tess's house, we said goodbye and gave each other a hug and kiss. I told her that I'd see her tomorrow, then she giggled and waved bye to me. After that, I booked an Uber and went home. I was super eager for school tomorrow because I would miss Tess so much, even if it was 1 minute without her. I just couldn't stop thinking about her. Little did I know that the next day would be the end of our loving relationship. That morning, I woke up, ate breakfast, brushed my teeth, got dressed, and rode my bike to school. I didn't even check my phone that morning for any missed texts or calls, and I didn't go on social media. I only checked my phone for the time. That was the biggest mistake I had ever made in my life. I arrived at school 15 minutes before my class started. 15 minutes later, the first bell of the day rang throughout the school, and I went to class. I got to my desk and sat down. Then the teacher walked into the room. Before it even started, I heard the lockdown siren go off. It was strange, and I was so confused. But I had to cooperate with the lockdown code. We all hid in an area where it was not visible from the outside window of the room, with the lights off. 10 minutes later, the principal came onto the speaker and told us that the lockdown was over and we could resume what we were doing. I thought it might have been just a drill. If it wasn't, then why did it only last just 10 minutes? And then before the teacher could even start the lesson, she read out loud from her computer and said that I needed to go to the principal's office. I didn't even know what I did. No matter what, I still had to follow directions. I then came to the principal's office, and he told me to have a seat. I was now more confused than anything. I saw a very depressed look on his face, but what he said next made my jaw drop. He told me that my girlfriend had posted a photo on Instagram saying that she was going to shoot up the school. Another person then saw the post and reported me. She had just been arrested and taken into custody. After hearing what he just told me, I started breaking down crying. I just lost the love of my life. He patted my shoulder and gave me a box of tissues, then asked if there was anything else he could do. I asked him if I could go home for the day to recover from what had just happened. He told me that I could, but that I would have to be at school tomorrow. I nodded my head and said thank you, walked out the entrance, and rode my bike home from school. When I got home, I saw that all of Tess's social media had been deactivated or deleted. The whole day, I thought about why she wanted to do such horrendous things that could have possibly taken the lives of others. This brought light to an incident from earlier in our relationship. When I asked her about what her past was like when we were dating, she told me that she was not comfortable telling me about it. I called my parents, and I just vented all of what I had in my mind. They also sounded very shocked because they couldn't believe it either. It was so out of the ordinary. I had to finish the rest of my high school days with a fear that something like this could happen again, and it was not over yet. I also sought weekly therapy because my mental state went down a ton. I don't know what happened to Tess after this. She never reached out to me again, and I'm pretty glad that she hasn't. She was really a messed up psychopath deep down inside. Wherever Tess is at now, I hope that she found the help that she really needs.